Hi, welcome to Silent Generation. I'm Joseph.
I'm Nathan.
And for this week's episode, we're doing Espionage and Spy-fi. I'm trying to think, what was our impetus for this?
Someone recommended it on the Discord.
Nice. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Before we get into that, I want to bring up that I'm going to Brazil later today for 2 weeks. So there's going to be like it's going to even out to being like a 1 week gap in between episodes, but we're recording today right before I leave. And then we're going to do an episode on Brazil the day after I get back. So you're going to get a good amount of content still, but I did want to bring that up. And also, if you do want to follow me on Instagram, I'm okay with that. If you want to see what I'm doing in Brazil, my handle is light_metals, which I'm very lucky to have because do you know what light metals are?
Isn't that like jewelry related?
Yeah, it's the name of an entire discipline of metalworking. I don't know how I got that as my handle.
Yeah, no, that's a big get.
I don't even do like metalworking that much lately. I mean, I'm just focused on the podcast, but yeah, I'm very lucky to have that handle.
Yeah, I keep on forgetting that like your time difference is not going to be that great either from Brazil. Is it in the same time zone?
It's like 2 hours ahead. Yeah. If you look at a map of the world, like Brazil is jutting out way farther east than you'd realize.
Think, yeah.
Yeah.
You're basically in New York, time zone wise. And also in this week gap, if you have a favorite episode or something you want to share with people, yeah, go ahead and do that. We're trying to grow the pod and get some more people in the Discord and stuff. I've been trying to post more in there. I don't know, we've got such a good crew going.
Yeah, I mean, we have a long history in Discord before the podcast.
I hate saying that, but it's true.
Yeah. So we have some friends in there. A lot of the people that we've had on as guests, a fair amount actually, are in the Discord server. Yeah. So you can interact with them. But yeah, so the first section on espionage and spy-fi, we're going to talk about the early espionage cases and then the emergence of spy-fi. And you started out by writing about the Dreyfus affair.
Yeah, I saw this pointed to on a lot of stuff online of like, in order for people to accept the idea of spies being heroic main characters, like a lot of cultural things had to happen to kind of lay the groundwork. And one of those is just kind of like knowledge of what state like spycraft involves. And so the Dreyfus affair, which happened in 1894, and this was some French military secrets had been leaked. And so the military apparatus just chose a fall guy who was just a Jewish like officer in the military. And they kind of set him up to fail, had a series of sham trials. It was stretched out for like 10 years. I don't know how much. And this was like when there was actually like the beginnings of mass media through newspapers. Like, I think this really did occupy, and like people were sorted into two camps. The French love, like when they have a political conflict, like giving names to groups. And so they're the Dreyfusards, the ones who are in favor of it. But yeah, this really brought like the like inner workings of spycraft to the public view. And I think it gave people like this exposure, like, oh, this is what our governments are doing on our kind of supposedly on our behalf, but in general.
Yeah, it did last a really long time, like 1894 to 1906. So you can kind of think of it as occupying the same space in people's heads as, say, like the O.J. Simpson trial or the Amber Heard Johnny Depp case. It was all over newspapers for like a really long time. But there are older examples of espionage. I think, like the Babylonian king Hammurabi recruited agents of all types to keep tabs on other kings, and even established a special intelligence bureau at the palace at Mari to collect, translate, and analyze documents provided by his many spies. So it had been going on for a long time, but I think the Dreyfus affair is like a good starting point to think about spy-fi because it was the first time espionage captured the public imagination in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, and then on the American side, we had the Rosenbergs.
So this case also involved Jews. So Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were both New York City-born Russian-American Jews who provided top-secret information on radar, sonar, jet propulsion, and nuclear weapon designs to the USSR. And they were the first and only people to ever be executed under the Espionage Act. So the Espionage Act, it's been used for a lot of different things. Like it was used right after it was passed as a law to prosecute like members of the IWW and other labor agitators. And it's been used in the modern day actually for whistleblowers to prosecute them. But this was like apparently like the greatest sin you could commit in terms of espionage. Like they were pissed.
No, it's amazing it took so long to get like such a strong act like the Treason Act, because that seems like one of the classic laws you're going to make first when you make an independent country is just really clamp down on treason. But I don't know, I think they just needed a time to like widen the definition of it. people try and draw a line between like, oh, is the Rosenberg case the American Dreyfus affair? And the answer is no, they were actually guilty is one thing there too. And it is interesting that these cases do often seem to involve Jews. They say there's like a few anti-Semitic like paradoxes where people accuse Jews of being two things. And when it comes to military things, Jews are accused of being militant but cowards is one thing. And we're accused of like not being involved in the militaries of the countries we live in. And then when we are, we're spies is the accusation there. So it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah. And I think spy-fi became popular when it did, around the end of World War II and the beginning of the Cold War, because it provided the American public a way to fantasize about what the front lines of the Cold War might look like. Because the Cold War wasn't that interesting. You'd had to glean what the tensions were like from newspapers, and it wouldn't have made for interesting cinema. But then the Rosenberg case provided a blueprint for like, okay, these are things that are happening on the front lines, and like that's where people like James Bond start to come in.
Yeah, the loss of like a conventional front line outside of like proxy wars, which was I guess the only front line in the Cold War. But yeah, you also put in here that like on the Rosenberg trial, I didn't know this, but the prosecutor's defense team and judge were all Jewish.
Yeah.
And so it feels like this we deal with our own kind of thing. Like it's so interesting inside America. There's just like an entirely Jewish court system that dealt with them.
Yeah, I found an interesting quote from an article titled, "Was the Rosenberg Trial America's Dreyfus Affair?" that said, for many Americans, the association between Jews and communism was, in fact, a strong one. Our evaluation of the general mood was that the people felt if you scratch a Jew, you can find a communist, said Arnold Foster of the strongly anti-communist American Jewish Committee.
Yeah, that's another one of the list of anti-Semitic paradoxes is that we're all communists and also uber capitalists as well. Like we are like the corporate owners of things, but we also want to like get rid of all private property. And people just hold these two things in their mind.
Even with Bernie Sanders, actually.
Yeah. Everyone's just like, oh, he's a communist and also he's living large and he has 2 homes.
Yeah. But yeah, on the trial being all Jewish, the article later said that there was a desire amongst establishment Jews to distance themselves from these commie Jews who were not patriotic because it was believed that they represented a danger.
Yeah. It's like, one of those like constant questions of Jewish assimilation. I think that assimilation in European countries seemed so out of reach to Jews that we just figured like, oh, it's never going to happen. They're never going to treat us like full citizens. So why even try? And it wasn't until America we're like, oh, we actually stand a shot at assimilating here, but there's a contingent who through their like ideology is holding us back from that. And so let's jettison them to kind of like save the whole deal. Yeah, I can kind of see that in my grandparents who are a lot more of the like established, I always describe them as like New Deal Democrats because they're just like classic center left type of people. But like, I think we had a strain of commie Jews in us because they're like members of the Arbeiterung, which is the workman's circle. And that was this like, a lot of people in it were communists, but most people would not describe them as that. But it was like an organization for immigrants and for working people. But yeah, so like a little bit of involvement with that, but then they always kind of view actual communism with skepticism. My grandpa would use the term fellow traveler to describe people who are like communist adjacent, basically.
I mean, it might have been like when someone wears all black and, they look like a goth, but they don't want to call themselves one.
Yeah, they're a fellow traveler goth. And then bridging the gap from these high profile cases to like actual interesting media being made off of this, you have novels like The Scarlet Pimpernel, which is such a weird, it's a flower, I guess is what a pimpernel is. But that was this book series written by a British guy in the like early 1900s about this foppish dandy by day who by night would go over to France and save the aristocrats. And I can't believe people were just eating up novels about saving aristocrats. Like this is just, I guess it shows like, the different value system we live in now. But like, I think, I don't know, maybe people have a nuanced take-ish on the French Revolution, but I don't think anyone is pro-aristocrat,
yeah,
I would say.
I mean, literacy rates were lower, 100 years ago. I don't know.
It was just rich people, like writing novels for rich people, basically. It was like any book from this period, you read about the author, and it's just like the 14th Baroness of Coronet or whatever. Like, it was just, rich people.
Yeah, the Scarlet Pimpernel is where the secret identity trope of spy-fi comes from. So in the novel, the protagonist, Sir Percy Blakeley, his alter ego is the Scarlet Pimpernel. And so every other sort of figure in media ever since that's had a secret identity, Zorro, Superman, Spider-Man, they can all kind of trace that trope back to this novel.
Yeah. It's I know people always bring up Batman for it because that's like they like forget about this in some of the movies, but like Batman's alter ego of Bruce Wayne, like it's sometimes played, he like plays up the dumb playboy thing. I think that's really fun when they do that more. Like I think in the Christopher Nolan movies, they just kind of make Bruce Wayne like a guy, a business guy, but no, they should like make him look actively dumb.
Yeah. And then you brought up pre-World War I spy fiction because things only really got good and the genre only became, the formula that it emerged into post-World War II. But yeah, I think the most famous early spy novel is probably The 39 Steps. It's about a detective who gets caught up in a larger conspiracy. And it's an example of how like authors transition from detective novels to spy novels because the book starts out like a traditional detective story and then the detective, uncovers a conspiracy. And you wrote later on in the docket about how like authors, they transition from detective novels to spy novels, right?
Yeah, so some like actual authors did, but you could see it over the course of some series. I think it was maybe The 39 Steps, the author of that, but the book started off where he is like purely an agent of his own thing, but he's caught up in this crazy conspiracy. I guess these books at the time were called like, they wouldn't call them, we'd call them thrillers now, but these were like political conspiracy books.
Yeah.
Basically from the late 1800s, early 1900s that have like a dashing adventure hero, political adventure novels, I think is what they were called. But he would always be just a regular but very cool guy caught up in this crazy mix of like statecraft and politicking. But he totally didn't want to do this, he's just in the midst of it. And then slowly they inch themselves towards like, all right, he's a detective, but he's working with the government. And then the final thing is like, he is an agent of the government. It took people a while to be like, okay with that, I guess, in a sense. Like, I don't know why we have such a natural skepticism of our own country, Yeah. And that kind of like leads up to the super spy. That's a term that's used for like James Bond and adjacent media is like not just regular spies, but a super spy is the ultimate like can-do person.
Yeah, it's interesting that a cohort from the detective story genre, they transitioned into writing about spies. It reminds me of actually what we talked about in the Cowboys episode where authors who wrote about knights and medieval England, they transitioned into writing about cowboys, and a lot of similar plot elements actually went with them into writing about cowboys.
Spies more so than cowboys is such a great example of like the back and forth of America and England when it comes to like culture and writing, even like well into the 1900s, because detective fiction, Sherlock Holmes, British, but then exported to America, and then you get hard-boiled detective fiction and Raymond Chandler stuff like in the interwar period into the 40s, and then that is inspiring like British, like Ian Fleming was inspired by like American detective writing into James Bond. So it's this like back and forth kind of like it gets exported somewhere else, incubated in another country, and then returned to its source.
Yeah. Love that exchange. So on Ian Fleming, we can actually get into James Bond. So Ian Fleming was the author who wrote the original 12 James Bond novels that then pretty much all of them got adapted into movies. And before he actually wrote them, he worked for the British government and he planned what was called Operation GoldenEye, which was a contingency plan he developed in case Germany invaded Gibraltar through Spain, which never ended up happening. But he got all of this like experience with intelligence. Like he oversaw 2 intelligence agencies during World War II. So it's easy to see how James Bond was informed by his personal experiences.
I didn't know about the Operation GoldenEye. I've actually been to Gibraltar. It's really cool. It's like, it's weird because it's this like long time, low grade political conflict between Spain and England, but it's also the one place where you can see monkeys in Europe, which is cool. I was like blown away by them as a kid. I got to like, I would say hold one, but really like it climbed onto me basically. But no, there's like 300 Barbary macaques on the Rock of Gibraltar, which they call the big mountain there.
The tourists feed them or something?
Yeah. I just have a very clear memory of this like ice cream shop that had a big sign that said like, "We will not reimburse you if a monkey steals your ice cream." There was a big ledge above the ice cream shop, so someone would walk out with an ice cream and a monkey would jump down and scare them and the person would drop their ice cream and the monkey would steal it, like almost on repeat. And I'm like, this store is just selling ice cream to monkeys. Like the people are just like a transitory thing in the middle of it.
Yeah. I've ever told you about the park in Chicago that Russian people go to feed raccoons?
No.
I haven't been there, but like I have friends that have gone, and I don't want to share the name of it because I don't think it's probably a good thing, you know, that they're feeding the raccoons.
Yeah, sounds bad.
Yeah, I might go one day on a fun date. We'll see.
I know there's a park, I think in the Cook County Park District, where Polish people go to get mineral water from like a pump station thing. There's like a natural well there, and people like drive up to it and like bring like 50-gallon totes and stuff. But I don't know. There's so much more to the Chicago park system.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah.
So yeah, Fleming published Casino Royale in 1953 as the first Bond novel, but the first Bond film ever made was Dr. No, which we both sort of watched for this week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I watched it forever ago. I don't know. I felt like I'd only seen like the new Bond movie, so I want to see where it started. But it's interesting, like comparing Bond to Sherlock Holmes, the other like large British cultural creation. And with Sherlock Holmes, like one of the first characters like brought into film, like one of the first book characters, like that was really given a treatment in film. And actually, Sherlock Holmes' first appearance on film was as a parody. It was a 30-second like animated film called like Sherlock Holmes Stumped, and it was just like one of those like super early proto films.
Yeah.
But eventually there was a period where movies were being made while books were being written. But the overlap is so much larger for Bond, I would say. So it was this kind of feedback loop between the books and the movies.
Yeah. I watched Dr. No. I had a really hard time with the sound quality. It was just so poorly mixed. But it was not because of modern day people being incompetent. It was because the technology was actually limited back then, probably.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they like all the villain stuff is like on sound stages, but like there's a lot of filmed on location stuff. Which always impresses me more so with older films. I just feel like that would be tricky. I also saw From Russia with Love, which is the second Bond movie. And the first one is a great example of what they call like first installment weirdness, where the first entry in something is just like more different from everything that follows it. And so it's smaller in scope. It's more detective-like in terms of unraveling a mystery. And the gadgets are limited. There's like a cyanide pill, but it's mostly just guns. And there's one chase scene, one car scene.
Yeah.
I would say.
There's also a tarantula scene, which is funny because, you know, everyone now knows that tarantulas won't kill you in your bed while you're sleeping. But, you know, 1960s people were probably shrieking in theaters watching that.
Yeah, they sneak a tarantula into his room to kill him, right? It's like a plot. Oh my God. Yeah, it's the hokey stuff I find so charming about like the 60s spy-fi stuff. Yeah,
it's very campy.
Yeah, and that's why I found it so weird. Like, I was just reading stuff about like spy-fi in the 60s, and there was almost more than there were the sheer number of Bond movies from 1960 to 69. There were parodies of them, but like they would have names like Carry On Spying, Dr. Goldfoot and the Bikini Machine, Dr. Goldfoot and the Girl Bombs. And they even made one called License to Kill, which is, of course, a phrase from James Bond 007, License to Kill, but maybe they didn't copyright it or something.
Yeah.
Someone else even got the rights to the book Casino Royale, but in order to make it, they had to make it as a parody, basically, so it wouldn't infringe on the Eon Productions. That's who was making the Bond movies at the time. But it's such a fun and lighthearted genre anyway. I think that's pretty poorly set up to parody. Like, if it is something like, that's why like Airplane, that movie is so fun, because it's parodying like, you know, the airline disasters. It's parodying like an actual movie. But that's like easier to send up because it's such a self-serious genre that you can poke fun at it. But like the James Bond movies are already called Octopussy. Like they're having fun with it. You don't need to like
that's the last
wink.
James Bond novel.
Yeah.
I'm glad you said that name because I can't.
Happy to help.
But yeah, ITBH, I've still only watched one Bond film ever, which is Dr. No. And I found it interesting that it was filmed in Jamaica, which it turns out that that's actually where Ian Fleming had wrote his novels. He had like an estate there that was nicknamed Goldeneye after the operation he did. He was obsessed with that word. Yeah,
I mean, it's a great like phrase. It's so like, I don't know, there's a lot of like good names in the Bond stuff. And there's the less creative ones, I think, like Octopussy and stuff, or Pussy Galore. That might be from something else. But
yeah. Dr. No, I think it was like an okay film. What do you think of, like, what's your favorite Bond film, would you say?
I really enjoyed like the most recent ones. It was interesting. Like my dad was into Bond movies. My mom really liked Bond movies. I think she's seen all of them. But when Daniel Craig was announced as the new Bond, my dad was very skeptical. My dad's very dark haired. My mom is very blonde, and he was like, "You can't have a blonde Bond. Also, he's too short." These are two very common lines at the time. Like people really hated the pick of Daniel Craig then.
Yeah.
He's not even that short. He's like 5'11" or something.
Yeah, I think he looks okay. He looks fine.
Yeah. But he's like Bond is traditionally very dark featured.
Yeah.
Is one thing. But I don't know. I really liked the newest one. And then Casino Royale, like from I guess 2006, that was such a good like way to introduce a new Bond by going back to the novels, basically. Because in terms of Casino Royale being on screen, there was the parody version in the 60s. There was an American like detective show that did an episode using the Casino Royale like book as a script, but it's starring American spy Jimmy Bond. And so it's just weird and doesn't count. So it was cool to like see this really good story like get its like big screen treatment finally.
Yeah, I think that Daniel Craig is fine as a Bond actor. The most famous one is definitely Sean Connery, who's featured in Dr. No. He was the first Bond actor. But I can never look at him that seriously because I went to school with a kid named Sean Conway, which sounds very similar to Sean Connery. Mm-hmm. And Sean Conway, for some reason, talked exactly like Sean Connery.
He didn't have the accent. He didn't have the like...
No, if you met him, you'd be like, yeah, he's forcing it.
Oh my God.
And I asked him like point blank, like, why do you talk like that actor? And he'd always deny it. But then I found out that he dressed up as Sean Connery for Halloween several times. So yeah. I think it was him putting on a show.
He's so in the closet about his Sean Connery obsession. Yeah, I think if you poll people, that's still everyone's favorite. People like that he brought a certain like physicality and gruffness to the role because like later ones like Timothy Dalton and Pierce Brosnan definitely like kind of overdid it on the like suave, smarmy thing. Like Pierce Brosnan always had like one eyebrow which really hiked up, but like yeah, Sean Connery was a bit of a brute. I think in his own like personal life too, he was just kind of a not intelligent.
Yeah.
Just kind of, there's this great story of him turning down the role as Gandalf because he didn't understand the script. That's what he said, but just having the confidence to do that. And he just like stopped working in Hollywood like in his like late 60s, 70s or so. He was just getting like pissed with, he said, the idiots making movies in Hollywood.
I feel like all the like really famous male actors get very ornery when they get older.
Yeah.
Like, you know,
Tommy Lee Jones.
Mark Hamill and like the Han Solo guy, you know.
Oh yeah. But no, Tommy Lee Jones lives in San Antonio where my sister went to college, and she told me that like people see Tommy Lee Jones around and he just like will not take a photo with them, like yells at them, like just the meanest little man in all of San Antonio.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, one thing just on the character of James Bond in general, like Ian Fleming says that he was inspired by Bulldog Drummond, which it really feels like any of these characters in spy or detective fiction older than James Bond, like really just don't age well in a lot of ways. Like, yeah, James Bond is a little hokey in the way that he's like good at everything, always gets the girl, always kills the bad guy. But the Bulldog Drummond books are just like, they feel more like the Jack Reacher series nowadays, which are just like, it's too good. He does always get the girl. He is the biggest, toughest guy. He has no weaknesses, no flaws, other than like caring too much and being too upright of a guy. One of the funny things about the Bulldog Drummond books is that they're apparently incredibly anti-Semitic. And that's one of the reasons they didn't get their movie treatment and that kind of stuff. Like, because he's less of a spy than James Bond. He's more just a general action man who he's the one-man task force. Like the government calls him up when they need to, but they don't like using him. But yeah, he would just always have very anti-Semitic asides in the book where he would just talk to the reader and be like, you know how Jews are. But yeah, and I think this is something that's forgotten. We think of like James Bond as being like, oh, the ultimate interesting spy. But like, no, the point was for him to be, he is like a tool or a mechanism. There's this quote from Ian Fleming: exotic things would happen around him, and he would be a neutral figure, an anonymous, blunt instrument wielded by a government department. I think literarily he's a tool, and then also the character is a tool that's like used by the government, but it's basically to show the reader interesting things. So I think the books were written with this assumption that the most interesting thing in a James Bond movie is the plot, and it's less so like the characters are interesting enough to get by, but it's about the conspiracy, it's about the gadgets, it's about the action. So I think the movies reflected that until the Daniel Craig movies started to show this shift of like, no, it's about the interiority of James Bond and who he is as a character. and his relationships, and his relationships being deeper than just sleeping with a woman, and then she dies tragically 2 scenes later, which is the usual Bond girl treatment. But,
On that, Nymphet Alumni, they have an episode called on Bond girls, actually, and they interviewed a Bond girl who does get killed by James Bond. Have you ever listened to that one?
Yeah, that was a really good interview. Because it was the actual Bond girl and her daughter. And I think the actress admitted that she had like very little acting experience. They were mostly just models who kind of got drafted into this.
Yeah, it seemed like the hardest part of her job was figuring out how to walk around in like weird shoes.
Yeah, they just gave her crazy outfits and shoes. Kind of dovetailing into our male desire episode. Like, people always love to hate on the Bond girls. It is pretty like low grade misogynistic, I would say. They're just eye candy and then they're killed. Like, they're just ultimately disposable. But like, they're such good examples of like whatever the style, like the style is held up as the most interesting or attractive for that given year. Is like really well shown in a Bond girl.
The Nymphet Alumni girls, they talked about the 77 Bond girls as being like US presidents, where you can look at each of them as like an era.
I think of all the, whatever, if you want to call it, problematic parts of Bond girls, I think it's definitely it's the cultural exoticism for me. Yeah. They're just like, this one's Chinese. Like, that always, like, that is what makes me the most uncomfortable about them. But they're like, they look so good. The outfits are crazy. I don't know. It's just, I really like the 60s ones. I just like the like crazy haircuts and like the insane eyeshadow and stuff. But yeah, I'm trying to think. And then closing on the future of James Bond, they always seem to write themselves into a hole. Like, the series is like the third most profitable live action movie series. Like, it just always keeps going. But I think that the people in charge of the IP are always like wondering what their new angle is. And if the angle with Daniel Craig was like, all right, a more personal take on a Bond who feels kind of is actually impacted and traumatized by like these crazy missions he has to go on and the people he loses. I wonder if the next one is going to be kind of a return to camp, maybe a little lighter hearted. And as we'll get into when we talk about Bourne, like this kind of grim, dark shift, like after you go very gritty and grimmer, it's just like, where do we go from here? Like, we're already like, there's already murder on the table. It's already an R-rated movie. Like, and they have Bond. I don't know if he's cried on film yet, but they've like shown this, emotional side of him. And they always kind of have this thing of like, oh, you're outmoded, Bond. It's a futuristic world. Now everything's done on computers. There's no use for field agents. And they've been doing that for like 5 movies now. And clearly because the movies need to be made, there must always be a reason for a field agent. But the next Bond is rumored to be Aaron Taylor Johnson. So he was in that movie Kick-Ass forever ago when he was like 18, 19. But he's actually British. I didn't know. But he's also famous for marrying the 42-year-old director of a movie that he was in when he was 18.
Wow. I wonder if there was a prenup.
But no, he's fascinating. He's also like Jewish. So first Jewish Bond. Really brings it all together to the Dreyfus affair there.
Yeah. And then the next one we can talk about is 3 Days of the Condor. So this was recommended to us by some of our friends.
Yeah, I watched this. I'm surprised I didn't watch this earlier. I was on a like 70s paranoid thriller kick previously, and this is like still a thriller, of course, but it's squarely in the spy camp.
Yeah, the protagonist isn't actually a like secret agent. He's like a bookish CIA analyst, so he's someone who's tasked with, along with his team, with like reading novels and stories from all around the world. They're like searching for something, but they're not told what. And they're just like transcribing and translating information.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of those early spy novels because he's an unwitting spy. Yeah, basically. I mean, with the conceit that he already works for the government and all that, but he's a bookish analyst. But I think it's funny because it's Robert Redford. He's hot. He's maybe one of the most beautiful men to ever live, and they're trying to play him off as like, oh, he's a nerd. They kind of quirk him up a bit. They give him some fun outfits. He's got like a wacky hat in the beginning, and he's riding this like French motorized bicycle to get to work.
Yeah, when I saw the movie at first, I thought of him as being like a librarian spy.
No, you're totally right. He is a librarian spy.
Yeah. But that scene with him on the motorcycle, it's actually, I think, so this movie came out in the fall of 1974, or was filmed, and the 1973 oil crisis happened right before it. So I think that scene of him on the bicycle is probably a reaction to the oil crisis, you know?
Yeah, it takes place in New York City, the movie. And this is like, it's very much an of its time movie, but in a good way. It's like post Watergate, in the middle of the oil crisis. Like that's why they talk about this paranoid genre of movies in the 70s, where it's just like, it's about like the decline of the American dream and the promises in a more kind of scarce and crafty world. We're like, all right, we've got less oil to go around. We've got less everything to go around. We have to like view each other with suspicion. Everyone's trying to get something from you. Like there's just like, there's not that American abundance anymore. And so like all the niceties we extended because of abundance are going away.
Yeah, it doesn't depict New York City in like the hollowed out way that say like The Warriors does, you know?
Yeah.
It still looks kind of nice.
Yeah, no. It's like the building that they secretly operate this analyst cell out of is very like beautiful.
Oh, it is
building.
really nice, yeah.
I'd actually like to make a little movie like filming location trip out to there. That'd be fun. They also shoot inside the you noted this, they shoot inside the Guggenheim.
Oh yeah, cool. That's when I knew the movie had a budget, because honestly with 70s films it's really hard to tell at first like if they're like, you know, a blockbuster or if they're like a B, C, D movie. But yeah, that shot told me that they had a budget to work with.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like the movie. I don't want to spoil too much about it.
No, yeah, people should go and see it. It's a good watch. It's I don't know, it's got it all. Like there's a fun romance in it as well. Robert Redford just like steals every scene. And there's a good villain in it too. Great blonde mustache. I've been growing a mustache to not great effect. But
I will say it's kind of hard to figure out who the villain is, which is part of the excitement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, definitely. Yeah, and then so the next series we can talk about is the Bourne Trilogy.
Yeah.
Have you seen any of these?
No.
It's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
I ended up watching like all three in quick succession in like high school, but no, they were a book series first, just like James Bond, but American in its origin. It's all based around like an amnesiac. Is that how you'd say that? Amnesiac spy who has all these abilities, doesn't understand how he got them, and so that's kind of the fun twist in the beginning, and then he understands more about like what got him to that point, and he sets about trying to kind of bring down the people who made him.
So he's like Batman, but he forgot.
Yeah. I just remember like in the first movie when he's like trying to reckon with these abilities he has, it's like I go into a restaurant and I'm like casing every entrance and exit, and I'm like watching and scanning people down for guns. Like, why do I have this? And so I think it's such like a fun twist on the spy genre. But the movies were really remarkable for their like shaky cam. This is really the heights of shaky cam at the time. And so it was a lot just grittier in the moment. The fight scenes were not like Pierce Brosnan karate chopping a guy. It was a lot more like bar fight type of stuff. And so it really like, I think it impacted so much more than just the movies being made. I'll get into it when we talk lightly about video games and stuff, but like it kind of made the like 90s James Bond smarmy CGI gadgets stuff obsolete. Like people read that as hokey, and they wanted something that was honestly kind of more similar to 3 Days of the Condor. Like, and it's kind of like gritty, smaller, personal scope.
What was interesting with 3 Days of the Condor was I feel like the gadgets in the beginning were all just about like scanning books and stuff.
Yeah, that's actually one of the audio mixing in that is really interesting. Just like the hum of all the machines. They always like tape to tape machines and stuff. Yeah, there's a lot of like hidden guns behind stuff because they have to like protect their analyst space, but like also present as a library. But
yeah. I don't really like the action genre, which is partly why I haven't watched the Bourne Trilogy. Also, my taste in movies is bad. I keep having to say that. But
they try and like extend the series out beyond the original trilogy. They brought in Jeremy Renner for a movie who's like, I haven't seen that one, but from what I gleaned from the Wikipedia article, he's a guy who's like, his action quest is set into action by the actions of Jason Bourne. And that just seems like, what are we running out of Bourne stories? We just have like this guy, this understudy for him who's like, his life got messed up by Jason Bourne.
Yeah. I mean, when there's like a central plot element that can be resolved that easily, which is just like, I need to resolve my amnesia. Like, I mean, I don't know the story, but like, I can see how that kind of tapered out.
Yeah. Yeah. And then another like thing that became big in the 2000s, like the Bourne series, the Alex Rider books. This is us kind of like dovetailing into like spy content for kids. But did you ever read these?
No, I did not.
No, I don't know. I don't know if these were pushed on me or something, or if I sought them out. But it's basically just like, it's pretty simple. It's teenage James Bond. He's a kid who I think he's an orphan, just like James Bond. And then he
Is
finds
his name James Bond though?
what?
Or no, it's Alex Rider. Duh.
No, it's Alex Rider. Yeah, and I think his parents were spies, but they were killed for something. So he's raised by his uncle, but then he loses that, and he's in the classic thing. He doesn't want to be a spy, but he's forced into it. And it turns out all the like hobbies and training he did like as a kid was actually training him to be a spy. Like he's into go-karting and like martial arts and gymnastics and all that. So it's like, it's a great way to explain a way of like, all right, to suddenly become a spy, you have to have some degree of ability. Like where would someone get that from?
Yeah.
But it's an interesting case of like them kind of eating the lunch of the actual James Bond franchise, because Ian Fleming Publications has like tried to do this before. In the 60s, they released The Adventures of James Bond Jr., 003 and a half. And it was supposed to be a big series, and then it just didn't sell, so it never became that.
Yeah, on the number being like 003 and a half, that made me think of like Codename Kid Next Door, which you remember they had like agents on the show.
Yeah, it was number 1, number 2, and all
3,
that.
4, 5. But then they start introducing like agents from like other parts of the organization, and they start to be like decimals and fractions. There's even one called like number 19th century.
No, yeah, that's fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so the Alex Rider books came out in 2000, and then there was Ian Fleming Publications then came out with a Young Bond novel series in 2005. So they're like, oh shit, we got to get our stuff together and actually start making money off of this. But yeah, it's written for young adults. It's young adult fiction. I liked it because I like a lot of good young adult series. They get like more and more transgressive as they go on. I guess they show more like action and violence, which unlike you, I'm kind of drawn to that stuff, especially with reading it. I think it always goes along better than watching it. So yeah, like young adult books get away with writing stuff that if you filmed it, it would be like TVMA, you know? And so it's interesting when they do adapt these. When I was a kid, they did make an Alex Rider movie. I remember watching it because I was so big onto the books, and I don't know, it was just all right. But now the books never stopped being written. They've like never gone 3 or 4 years without a new installment. Apparently, like up to now, to 2024, there's been one released. And then they made an Amazon series that's like three seasons deep on it. So like I don't know, it's strange whenever something like becomes that long running of something. There's obviously like as we'll get into next, like a desire from kids for like spy content. But the Amazon show, it might be for adults. I guess as I was kind of saying, like it's pretty violent. Like
yeah, you know, I work for a library, and I occasionally I'll have to do the pick list when people have holds. And so one of the book series that's like the most popular with children right now is called like Spy School. And like there's a couple of novels, and there's like underwater spy school and like a lunar one, and there's different themes.
Yeah, no, that's kids are always going to yearn for a very cool school thing. I'm an anime skeptic broadly, but my cousin, whose tastes I very broadly respect, told me to watch My Hero Academia, which is a very like normie anime. Yeah. But he was like, you remember, we were kids, we were very into Naruto. What was the best part of Naruto? It was the part where they were in like a ninja school, and they had like exams, the Chunin exams. And I don't know, as a kid, I loved Sky High. Of course, like it's very elemental. Like kids want this kind of stuff. They want a school of spies.
I've heard Sky High has like, if you watch it as an adult, it has like a strange political theme. I've seen like YouTube recommendations, but I don't know the story.
I'm trying to think. It might be a little bit like I don't know. The second Incredibles movie had a weird political theme as well, where it was like, you know, power should only be given to those who have been like genetically chosen. Like people who try and like rise to the ranks of the chosen through their own like means should be punished and brought down. It's very
that's sort of like the Legend of Korra. Yeah, that's sort of the storyline of that.
No,
but I thought you were about to say like it was like the political theme was like 2017 Sheryl Sandberg's feminism. But
yeah, it was girl boss themed. Yeah, it was. Yeah. It was lean in themed. Women can't have it all.
I haven't thought about that phrase in so long.
Yeah.
Hillary Clinton is probably going to be in Chicago this week for the DNC.
Oh man,
I'm leaving at such a good time, honestly. Yeah. Like, I mean, I hope nothing bad happens, but you know, bad things usually do happen when we host the DNC.
Yeah. No, 1968 and then 1996, right?
Yeah.
The last time we did it. Yeah. Fingers crossed that nothing historical happens. Yeah, that's kind of crazy. But yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say if there was like an especially, at least for kids, as we get into spy parodies and kind of like alternate takes on the genre. Was the early 2000s especially spy heavy? Has it always been present? I mean, were the 90s or 2010s a trough in spy content? I don't really think so.
I mean, I remember Marissa on the Insect Aesthetics episode, she brought up how when she was a kid, her two favorite types of toys were either like bug themed or spy themed.
Yeah.
And so like for her, I remember there being like spy toys in like Toys R Us and stuff. So I think that probably like fed into it a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. The other big like 2000s spy content was, of course, the Austin Powers movies, which I don't know. I've never seen them. It was just too present in my life. As a kid, my parents thought they were like the greatest thing ever, and I wasn't allowed to watch them. But I don't. Do they age well? It just sounds like the phrases have become like too omnipresent for me to like go back and actually watch it. Like, yeah, baby.
Yeah. I'm not a fan of any attempt to make groovy a thing again. I actually
keep it in the past.
There was a guy I went on a few dates with that I stopped talking to in part because he kept saying groovy.
Yeah,
but
that's fair.
Yeah, I like mid 2000s humor a lot. Or mostly I just like how lighthearted the audience's reception was to it. Like if you ever watch like Mad TV skits, like people are like elated, like actually laughing in the audience on like SNL in the modern day. And I feel like when you watch, say, like the Scary Movie parody series or even Austin Powers, like you still get that energy even if there's not a laugh track.
Interesting.
Like it's so like lighthearted.
Audiences were better. I could see that.
Yeah. But yeah. Have you ever heard of Mad Mod? Did you see the Teen Titans episode with him?
Yeah, Mad Mod. That was like the British TV based kind of like villain.
It was a DC supervillain from the Teen Titans series who was almost like a precursor to Austin Powers. Although I tried to like look into it. There were so many things this week that like I was like, okay, I could spend an hour trying to look into like if this fact about a children's cartoon is like what I think it is or not.
On this very well maintained wiki for Kim Possible or whatever.
Yeah, it wasn't really worth it. But that was one where I was like, I swear I've heard that Austin Powers aesthetic was influenced by Mad Mod, but like I wasn't able to find anything on that.
Yeah, I guess it's also like it's the 2000s like cool Britannia period that we've talked about, where they were like culturally ascendant, and a lot of like 2000s British cultural content was kind of like referencing back to the British invasion of the kind of last time they were culturally influential. Like, remember this, guys, when people cared about British people?
I mean, people who watch Love Island are going to disagree with me, but I feel like the last big British show that like people in my social circles were into that like I also was like, okay, I'll watch that was Misfits. Have you ever seen that?
I knew you were going to say Misfits. Yeah. My sister was obsessed with Misfits. I would like watch it out of the corner of my eye.
I love the
Misfits
Chab girl.
Skins. Yeah. And like the skinny guy with the curly hair. I don't know. That's how I picture like all the.
His name was Nate, and I didn't like that. His name might have actually just been full on Nathan.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, he was my least favorite. He was too like hedonistic.
Yeah, hedonistic. No, yeah, between that and Skins, like just these very like brash British shows from the early 2010s. Would you say they were indie sleaze by maybe a stretch? I don't know.
Oh,
maybe,
for sure.
Yeah, I mean, just because like I don't know, skinny curly haired guys from that era, I'm like, those are the Kooks. Those just remind me of the musicians, the Kooks. But yeah, so yeah, and then we both like knew when we started this episode we want to talk about Spy Kids because I really think it's like a series that punches above its weight. It's like much better than it has to be. I think I realized this when I was like it was like early college or something. I was just like channel changing at my grandparents' house, and I ended up watching like all of Spy Kids. And I thought I was just gonna change the channel at some point, and I didn't. And I'm like, oh, there's like something more to this here. This is like crafted with love.
Was this Spy Kids 1 or 2?
It was 1. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I kind of like 2 more. That's the one where they go to. I think it's called Island of Lost Dreams. Okay, sounds really gay, but
really hokey now. But
no, they have like these really interesting like CGI animal mix-up monsters, like the flying pig at the end. That is from that. But
yeah, Robert Rodriguez, super interesting guy, like Mexican guy from Austin. And Austin, before it was this whole like tech capital that it is now, always had like a great slacker spirit. It was a college town. It was a capital town. So there was always like intelligence and political things. But there was a great indie film scene out of there. And his movies were like super brash and violent and campy. And then his movie, I think, is Desperado, or I forget. But he had someone come up to him and be like, "Oh, my kid loves your movie." And he's like, "Do not show your child my movies. Like, no one that young should be watching them." So he realized he wanted to make a kid's movie. And I don't know. People always say, "Oh, you couldn't make that nowadays." But it seems I don't know, for being a new IP like that, I think it'd be a harder sell to studios now.
If they did, it would be far more low budget and it would be a much bigger flop.
Maybe.
Because it feels like they had, like the director, he had a big enough budget to execute his dream. I mean, it's very campy. Yeah. You know, I think that this example of spy-fi film, it actually like, it pushes past, you know, the limits of science fiction. It becomes much more fantasy. I mean, you know, the like thumbs, the like guys who are just made out of thumbs. There's nothing realistic about that.
He said that was something he drew as a child, the thumbs. Like this is all like pulling from a lot of various spots. And his first idea for the movie was like really like he wanted just evil Willy Wonka was kind of the first idea. And then he kind of built the spy thing around that of like, all right, how do we take down evil Willy Wonka? And so he said that, yeah, the first one was James Bond meets Willy Wonka. And the second one was James Bond meets the Island of Dr. Moreau, basically. Yeah, he was given such a long leash with this. It's a pretty like, and then also the really cool thing about it is that like the whole family is Mexican. Yeah. I mean, Antonio Banderas is Spanish, but yeah.
Yeah, unbeknownst to a lot of people, Chicago is like 1/3 Latino. And so I actually went to an elementary school that was like majority Latino, and I grew up largely, it was mostly Mexican, all my classmates. And so I'd watch like children's shows and children's movies, and I would be so confused by the lack of representation. I'm not actually one to like fret over representation too much, but
it just wasn't matching with what you saw.
Not at all. Yeah. I mean, and the few examples I did see on TV, like, you know, Esteban from The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody and Jacobo from this obscure show called The Replacements. They were both Latino, but they were like, I think in the shows they'd mentioned that like Esteban might have been on like a work visa, and then Jacobo is like an international exchange student. Like I was so confused that I never saw representations of Latino people where they actually like lived here and were Americans. Yeah. And I feel like this is kind of the only big example I can think of.
Yeah, I was kind of jealous because my cousins, who I like was very close with when I lived in Las Vegas, still very close with, but they're half Mexican, and I thought that like. And they were older brother, younger sister, so not like Spy Kids, but we all would like play Spy Kids as a kid. But I felt like they had a closer connection to it because of that. And so I was always like, oh man, I wish I was half Mexican. But yeah, there's like, when you're listing off those like Latino coded animated show characters, I was thinking of, we'll talk about Kim Possible in a second, but Senor Senior Senior and Senor Senior Junior. Yeah. And Senor Senior Senior in Kim Possible is voiced by Ricardo Montalban, who plays the grandpa in Spy Kids. And he is like such a great classic actor. He was very pigeonholed as like the, how do I describe it? Like the sensual Latin lover type. And he even kind of expressed like dismay at that. He was saying that like he really played into like what people wanted to see. Yeah. And he was referencing this Mexican actress who like did that for a bit in Hollywood and then went back to Mexico, made films with Mexican directors and made the best stuff. And he's like, sometimes I wish I did that. But instead I just kind of like played to the masses. But no.
Yeah, I honestly don't remember Senior too much from Kim Possible, honestly.
Oh, man.
You want to get into Kim Possible now?
Yeah, let's hop into it.
Yeah. Okay. So I actually have a wild story about Kim Possible, and you're going to get confirmation of this on air. Okay. So I'm going to pull this up on my phone. So when I was a little kid, my brother, when Kim Possible came out, he had told me and all my siblings that he actually had been shown Kim Possible in a classroom along with all of his other classmates. And it was sort of like, it wasn't even the trailer, it was like a proto trailer. And they were asking the kids for feedback on like, what do they think of the characters? Do they like them or not? And he had told me that actually Kim and Ron had opposite personalities in what he had seen and that they had switched them. And this isn't something that I found, you know, during my this was one of those like random cartoon facts that I spent a little bit more time on because I wanted to see actually if this was publicly known or not. But I'm going to give this to you and you can kind of read it off.
All right, so I'm reading off Nathan's brother here. It was a small group of kids brought into a room with a wheeled out TV and VHS tape. On the tape was the line drawing scenes for the first episode. We watched it all the way through. We were asked questions like, on a scale of 1 to 5, how well do you relate to Ron? They also asked us about the mole rat, Kim, and the characters. I remember my group saying that Ron should be like Homer from The Simpsons. The title was originally Kim Impossible. Oh.
Isn't that wild?
Right, that sounds Like, so my initial read on this was skepticism, because I said that it sounds like the kind of stuff that kids would tell each other of like, well, my uncle works at Game Freak or at Nintendo, and he said that you can really catch Mew. You just have to go underneath the truck. Like,
Yeah.
It just sounds like kid lore kind of stuff. But I don't know. It sounds pretty grounded. That sounds like.
And you saw the part where like I initially asked him, and then he was like, "How do you know this?" He like didn't even know that I remembered this.
Yeah, no, those things really stood out in your mind. Yeah. Yeah, from what like little stuff I could glean about it, there's some mention of like, oh, we wanted like a strong female role model for the show, and we thought it'd be fun to like twist things around.
Yeah.
But no, the Homer Simpson thing is good there.
I know, that's one of those like little elements that, you know, life is stranger than fiction, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I watched Kim Possible quite a lot. It was my younger sister really liked it. I feel like most girls did.
Mm-hmm.
A fun fact about Kim Possible is actually, I think it was originally slated to have 3 seasons, and then there was a petition that actually worked. That was how the show got a 4th season, which almost never happens.
A petition by kids?
Yeah.
Wow.
Viewers, they were like, please make a 4th season of Kim Possible, and it actually happened, which like almost never does.
No. Yeah, it was big for us. We would like, you know, play it as kids. I also, their like go-to junk food thing was a nacho, which was like a nacho taco.
Yeah.
Which, if you think about it, just sounds like painful. Like, I don't know, like just a chip stabbing the top of your
It'd
mouth.
be a mess.
Yeah.
You can't even eat that with a fork after it like falls apart.
No, yeah. But no, it was a really fun show. And it also like pushes that, as just with Spy Kids, where like, I think when you translate spy content to kids, you can either go pretty realistic with it, like the Alex Rider thing, like firmly stay in the spy camp, or you can go like full fantasy into it where you almost end up being a superhero, basically. And that's like, Kim Possible has no, what's it called? Alter ego. Like she's famous and stuff. And she's much more, I think the show is a little more superhero shaped than spy shaped, I would say.
Yeah, because Shigo in the show, she has like that green
laser
plasma that she's always throwing around.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I've
heard a lot of people say that like, or bisexual girls say that like Shigo is a big crush.
Yeah. That's a big, I don't know. It's a common costume idea for girls nowadays. Yeah, Shigo is loomed large in the cultural conscience.
That's not an easy costume either.
No. You got to paint your face white too.
Yeah, maybe it's just like goth makeup.
Yeah.
But I think the most iconic thing to come out of Kim Possible is the show's ringtone, which most people will know. But I think that like in retrospect, you know, I was just thinking about like when ringtones were the most popular, which was around the time Kim Possible came out. It was on air from like 2002 to 2007. And I think ringtones were a big thing back then because not everyone had a cell phone. And it was a way to announce that you had one. Because there's no reason in today's world that like people are so like adverse to like ringtones, because they actually are kind of fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think they just performed a different function than people realized back then.
No, yeah. My mom's ringtone for a bit was a recording that my sister made to be a ringtone, which was, "Mom, pick up your phone. It's Becca, pick up your phone." Like, which I thought was cute.
Yeah.
But no, there was a lot more, there was a ringtone culture. It was just we were so excited to have phones.
Yeah.
We wanted to trick them out in all types of ways.
Occasionally I'll have library patrons who have ringtones and they're always on the like inappropriate side. Like that's what they go for. Yeah.
That's so good.
Like one time a patron's phone was going off and it was basically someone just like swearing. That was the ringtone. And then the patron was like, "Oh, sorry, that's my mom."
Just setting yourself up to be embarrassed. Like, I can't imagine like having a ringtone I wouldn't like be okay with going off at like a funeral. Like worst case scenario, like what's the most inappropriate thing that's gonna happen? I don't know. I think I built a lot of my like life around that of like what's the most embarrassing situation this could be in.
Yeah. Most recently, the most recent example I can think of is a patron who's every time he gets a text message, it's set to do a wolf whistle, like at a woman. Yeah, it does that.
Oh wow!
And so we'll be at the library and we'll do that like 20 times in a row.
The wolf whistle, man.
Yeah,
that'd be crazy to see that happen like in real life. To see someone actually like wolf whistle a woman, actually.
Yeah. One final thing on ringtones I want to say. So, are you familiar with the genre of hyperpop?
Yeah, of course. What? Yeah, man.
Well, before it had that term, before that term was coined, people initially referred to it as post-ringtone. Like, I'll link a 2014 Vice article where they use that term. And I kind of still like that a little bit more. Hyperpop sounds generic to me.
Yeah.
But yeah.
What I liked about hyperpop is I remember like listening. I was at like summer camp, like as a counselor, and then we would just play like for the kids, just like random 2000s like fun songs. And like when I'd really listen to the Backstreet Boys, I'm like, this is crazily like overproduced. Like this is frenetic. There's just so much happening in this. Like, what's stopping us from doing this again? Like it almost sounded kind of expensive. Like a lot of people spent a lot of time in the studio like overlapping this stuff. And so I don't know, not that I predicted the rise of like hyperpop that would happen like 2 to 3 years after I kind of made that assessment, but I don't know. I think that like hyperpop had to happen. It really like takes that like zaniness from 2000s production.
PC music was on my radar like so early because of my interest in C-punk actually.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the first magazines to write about C-punk was a magazine called Super Super. And before they shut down, one of the last things they wrote about was, or they'd published on the YouTube channel, was like a series with GFOTY, Girlfriend of the Year. And she was then put on PC Music. And so I was listening to PC Music when like they had like, 10,000 downloads for a song,
Wow, damn.
back, I would say in 2012. So I was one of their like earliest supporters. I've never given them money. I don't like buy music like anyone else, but I was like giving them likes. So yeah.
Wow. No, yeah, ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
Definitely. And then next thing, a very, very short section on like spy video games. This is kind of just my little soapbox to spiel about the death of Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell. This is just a stealth game I really liked that was kind of like one of the things of spy media that I was really drawn to. But it also like kind of dovetails into what we were talking about earlier with like the impact of like the Bourne movies and the changing of like what people expected from spy media in the mid to late 2000s. But I think the series started in like the late 90s. Basically, they were doing the books and the video games at the same time. Your main character is Sam Fisher. He's an operative for Third Echelon, which is like a spy, an agency inside of the NSA, which is funny now because the NSA, like, we hate them thanks to like what we know about them through Snowden and all that. But yeah, they're played up as the heroes this time. Well, actually, kind of. But the game I like the most of it is Chaos Theory, which is released in 2005. It's like a stealth game. You're hiding in the shadows. The mechanics are really good. It's kind of clunky to like move around and change your weapons, but it makes you like really like think. And there's a lot of what people call now like emergent gameplay. There's like 6 different ways to solve a problem in the game, and they really they put a lot of love into it. You can like eavesdrop on conversations of characters. It really it feels the most spy-like of any game I've played. But the series goes dormant for stretches, and then it comes back. And in 2010, they released Splinter Cell Conviction, which is where they Bournified the game. Basically, it was, if the past games were focused more on these international conspiracies and unraveling them, this one was very focused on Sam and how his daughter was killed in a car crash. But turns out that was actually like staged by the Splinter Cell inside the NSA, and so he has to go, and it's like a personal revenge story. And I don't know, the character is like interesting. He's very like James Bond. He's like acerbic and snappy and has a lot of like sarcastic quips, and has like a strong sense of like character and personality, but there's just not enough there to work with. And so they try and like, wring blood from a stone with that. I think it's also like, it also really falls into this fallacy that a lot of video games have, that they can tell stories as well as written media and as well as movies. And I do not think that's the strength of interactive media, is storytelling.
I mean, especially now that things are pretty much always open world, the linear plot gets lost.
Yeah, exactly. Like with the pacing of it, when you're able to go to all these different like side quests and stuff. I think the strength of the art that video games can be, and we were talking recently, like I'm a video game skeptic, I would say, nowadays, in terms of the value proposition of how much time people spend on them and how much art and fulfillment they get out of them.
Yeah.
Not to be so reductionist like that, but I think that video games are much better at conveying characterization. You can really like build a character over time, and they're good at mood and like really setting a scene and a setting and environment. But like telling A to B story is where like it's just what makes a well-paced video game playstyle wise is so different from what makes a well-paced story. It just cannot be done. Like, I don't know, even like games that are held up as having a great story, like BioShock. Like half the time I was playing that game, like, what am I doing again? Like, where am I going? Like, but
Yeah.
I think that game doesn't actually have a good story. It has a great world.
Has a good mood.
Yeah, it has a great mood and consistent world, and it has great little snips of stories through like audio tracks and all that. But yeah, the game series has gone dormant, and kind of like talking about like, you know, if the James Bond IP was not going to make a good young James Bond, then some random author would. And since Ubisoft seems uninterested in making good Splinter Cell games, like little indie games have popped up trying to capture the magic of Chaos Theory, the installment that I and all the other sweaty nerds online like. And then trying to shift away from their distractions in the
Would you say like Dishonored feels similar?
Yes. I would say both Chaos Theory and Dishonored owe their origins to Thief, this game I've never played that was from the 90s. But stealth games and then immersive sims are like share a very common origin, basically. And those are the only video games I like, it seems nowadays. Those are just right up my alley. Prey and Dishonored. I just like games that like have an interesting world that you can explore kind of at your own stealthy and slow pace. And I like having multiple ways to solve problems.
Yeah, I'll bet my tongue on video games because I do have a PS5, but I don't want to reveal yet again what I play.
Yes.
Yeah.
But no. And then we have a section here about what is so erotic about spy-fi.
Yeah. I mean, I think that romance is a big part of spy-fi because the plots revolve around secrecy and deception. Like you can never really know what another person is thinking, and that gets really heightened when the other person could be a double agent trying to kill you.
Yeah.
And that's where I think a lot of people get so much joy out of watching like James Bond, you know, seduce some woman who then tries to kill him. Because there's something Freudian about it, which I'm not like a big Freudian guy, but people seem to really gravitate to his ideas. And I think there is a little bit of validity to what Freud thought and found. So I can see it though. Like the danger, you know, gets people's heart racing.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that you can physically be with someone and then not mentally like understand their values or their desires, but you can still share that very like intimate thing.
Yeah. It's for me, like I've come to find that like, you know, honesty, sincerity, truthfulness, those are different words for different reasons. They mean different things. You can have a blind spot, but you know, I have a hard time understanding myself. And so I'm always trying to be like really honest with people about like what I'm thinking and doing.
Yeah.
I can't imagine having those layers.
It's like a radical honesty. Have you heard of that? Like it was bigger in like the 80s and 90s. There were people who would raise their kids with radical honesty where you just do not ever lie under any situation. I was listening to some radio program. A person was talking about she and her brother were raised like this, and she fell away from it. She thought that it was actually kind of like a moral cop-out. Like it being honest like lets you hold yourself apart from other people because it will push people away. And she talks about how her brother has like never really found a job because in every job interview they're like, all right, we have to ask you this, have you ever done drugs? And he always says that he's like did mushrooms once when he was 18. And they're just like, because you said that, we can't give you the job. Like you were supposed to lie there. And so he's been able to like kind of have an artificial cap on his life of just like, I've never achieved anything, but I've had my scruples the whole time. Because he's held himself to that. I always thought that was interesting. It's like, I don't know, it makes it seem so noble to lie because it lets you participate like in the world more as opposed to just being like a monk who never lies.
Yeah. I mean, I think that at minimum, what's okay is lying by omission. I'm starting to become more of a purist, so I'm trying to be even more honest than I was before. But yeah.
No, yeah. The lying by omission is always, that's a tricky one to squash. That's always going to happen.
Yeah.
But yeah. And then on other erotic overtones, can't even call them undertones, they're all overtones in spy stuff. I was surprised by the light bondage elements in 3 Days of the Condor.
Yeah.
That's got a good, it felt like it was over very fast. The movie is like well paced and the romance is like well done, but kind of fast. But that's kind of the nature of the show, of the movie. It only takes place in 3 days. Like I like a hard time limit kind of movie in that way. But I think a funny play on like the erotic nature of spy-fi is the music video for Genghis Khan by Mike Snow. You ever seen this?
I'm not.
Do you remember the song Genghis Khan?
Yeah, I do remember that. I don't really like it.
But it's this music video director who has done like other stuff with them, But the video is about like a classic Bond type villain. He's toying with his like James Bond stand-in. He's going to kill him with a laser and has him tied down to a metal board, of course. But he doesn't kill him, and he goes home, and he has like a wife and kids in a suburban house, and he's just unfulfilled. They're kind of showing that like, what if the Bond villain was like a day job, you know, that you didn't actually like have any like love for. And then basically it focuses on the interplay between the Bond villain and the Bond spy, and it's shown that like they need each other is always the line, that they have this like erotic interplay. And so the villain lets the spy go, but the spy comes back and they do a dance scene together, and they're shown in like blissful gay love after. And I don't know, I think it's fun. It's just like, yes, people always kind of make fun of the Bond movies for like, it is kind of about two guys and the women are ephemeral in it.
Yeah.
It's like the rivalry of two men, and then just women are used in the middle of it. So it's pretty gay in that aspect.
Yeah. I mean, on Infant Alumni, they were saying that they think the next Bond series, the twist could or should be that he could be bisexual. So
I would be bummed by that, because that just so plays into like the duplicitous bisexual trope kind of thing. That's like always when you want to, they did some like statistical analysis of this, and it's like bisexual characters on screen, like 70% of them are villains and they always die.
Yeah.
But no.
Well, if it's James Bond though, I don't know. I feel like the twist could be like he has like a partner and then catches feelings. I don't know.
Yeah.
That would be a tasteful way to do it, probably.
Yeah, maybe.
But yeah, I want to bring up, so it's important to note that there's a difference between state and industrial espionage. So state espionage is typically what's depicted on screen, but I can think of one really cool example of industrial espionage. Can you guess what it is?
Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Or
yeah, well, I
Wonka.
rewrote it in the docket, so you know. But so yeah, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was actually inspired by Roald Dahl's childhood, because during his school days, Cadbury would often send test packages to the school children in exchange for their opinions on the new products. At that time, around the 1920s, Cadbury and Rowntree's were England's two largest chocolate makers, and they each often tried to steal trade secrets by sending spies posing as employees into the other's factory. Because of this, both companies became highly protective of their chocolate-making processes. It was a combination of the secrecy and the elaborate, often gigantic machines in the factory that inspired Dahl to write the story. And so it's interesting because actually in the 1971 film, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Charlie actually learns as a moral of the story that industrial espionage is bad. Because at the end of the film, Charlie nearly loses the contest along with all the other children because he and his grandfather took fizzy lifting drinks without permission. But then Charlie gives an everlasting gobstopper back to Willy Wonka that his grandfather was planning to sell off to another candy maker. And so then Willy Wonka's like, oh yes, you're a good child. You get the factory. Yeah.
You know, Roald Dahl actually hated that movie.
He did?
He hated the adaptation. I think it's so, because everyone loves to say like, oh, of course I love the 1971 adaptation. Of course I hate the Johnny Depp weird Tim Burton 2000s one. But Roald Dahl hated the beloved one.
I wonder why. Do you know?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what it was. I think it was something about like, he wanted it to be even darker. And I'm like, man, come on. The tunnel scene, like, that's not dark enough.
Yeah.
But yeah.
On chocolate making, so you remember how I had my like exotic fruit phase and I was getting fruit from Miami Fruit in the mail? Yeah. I got a cacao pod twice. One time I ate it, another time I gave it to my sister on Christmas. And I, opened up the pod. The beans, they're covered in this like really gooey, like white substance that when you suck on it, it's sweet. But then when you bite in, it's very like earthy. It kind of tastes like dirt and it's bitter. You get a buzz out of it in a way, I think, because it probably has a lot of vitamins and your body's like, yeah, eat more. But, after I opened up the pot and I had a few beans, I was like, okay, what if I made chocolate?
Yeah, one would think, yeah.
Yeah, and then I started to look into the process and it's so convoluted and complex. Like I wouldn't even be able to do the third step because I wouldn't even be able to do the first step because I looked up what to do. And the first thing you need to do is ferment the beans for like a couple of days from 70 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit the entire time. I don't live in the tropics. Also, it's like April and I couldn't do that.
No, it's an insane, like, I don't know how people arrived at like the pre-Columbian like chocolate drinks and stuff. Yeah. I guess they had the environment to ferment it, but still, like, would just be a very long sequence to get there.
Well, prior to colonization, the New World, they didn't have sweeteners. They didn't have anything to add into it. So it was a very bitter drink. But yeah, they still liked it. But yeah, I mean, chocolate, from doing my research, it's an inherently processed product. There's no way for it to be like more natural. I mean, if it is like, okay, like it's a little bit healthier, but it's always going to be a processed food.
Yeah.
And I don't even think the work you can put into maybe trying to make your own chocolate bar is worth it at all. I don't think it's going to taste better.
It's just one of those things like hard line, like it can't be.
Yeah, you can't have a homemade chocolate bar.
Yeah. That's I don't know, in COVID when I was looking for stuff to cook and all that, I briefly thought about getting into bagels. And I'm like, people who truly love bagels, they just go and they buy bagels. Like it is like and that's why like the actual like bagel making places in New York City are these like giant operations. Cause just like the amount of equipment you need to make a good amount of bagels, you might as well like scale it up. Basically, it's like so intensive.
I've gotten bagels before that are frozen and then I like bake them in an oven.
Yeah, I'll get those.
Those are okay, right?
There's these ones, Taste of New York, they're actually like, they're made in New York and they're frozen and they're shipped here. And then you just finish them in the oven. And I thought those were very good.
Yeah. So I want to bring this up too. So why is Vienna, Austria, the espionage capital of the world? So Austrian law only prosecutes espionage conducted within its borders if the espionage directly harms the state of Austria. So let's say like Russia is spying on China within Austrian borders. That's totally fine. They won't be prosecuted for that because it doesn't, again, directly harm the state of Austria. And then another thing that's like factoring into this is Austria has a constitutionally mandated status of neutrality. It was passed in 1955. And so they regularly they just like do not allow themselves to take sides in international conflicts. So they're this like hotbed of spy activity in Vienna, especially.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. Their neutrality is viewed, I think, a lot more nobly than like France's, per se. But I don't know. Maybe they just pull it off. I mean, the Swiss pull it off as well too.
Yeah. No, I mean, Americans do look down on countries that were like neutral, say in World War II, like especially the French.
Yeah.
But
no, my dad would call them cheese-eating surrender monkeys, which is a phrase stolen from The Simpsons that became like surprisingly enduring. But that was after they wouldn't help us out in Iraq, which they were right about in the end. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I find like Austria's neutrality, also Switzerland, neutrality can be very like sexy and mysterious,
What's going on in their minds? Like, what's going on in the Austrian mind?
Yeah. And also, it's not really like a cop-out if you're being declarative about it. Like, if a country is neutral due to apathy, due to like being like poorly managed, like whatever. But if you're like doing it decisively, you then can take an active role as a negotiator, as an arbiter of peace. Like it is a cool position to take. But yeah, I think Austria is also interesting because it's very much like a Western country and an established member of the European Union, but it has a much closer relationship to Eastern Europe and Russia than people would think. Like I once heard West Virginia described as being like the most northern southern state and the most southern northern state. And I feel like Austria is a little bit like this, where it's like it's the most eastern western state. And then I feel like Czechoslovakia is the most western eastern state in Europe.
I think that's a good read. Yeah. It's like the Eastern Western Europe divide is like always going to make people mad. You can try and like strictly draw the line at like the old Iron Curtain. It's like that's Eastern Europe, but you're just describing the Iron Curtain basically. And a lot of places see themselves as like the bridge between East and West broadly. And, I could definitely see Austria as the bridge between East and Western Europe. But I was like looking this up. I was trying to see like what maps people try and draw. And I just found a random unqualified guy on Reddit by the username of Autistic Inquisitive. And he posted on r/maps his personal map of what he considers Western and Eastern Europe. Unprompted. No one asked him to do this. And everyone's just yelling at him in the comments. He put Czechia and Finland under Eastern Europe, and he put Albania under Western Europe. And that's going to make people mad.
I feel like he was just trying to draw like a really straight line.
Yeah. Autistic Inquisitive. But we have this like need to categorize and draw lines. Maybe this is kind of Reddity of me, but I like the map of tomato and potato Europe, of just what places use more tomatoes in their cooking and what places use more potatoes. And Romania is like the interesting line between the two, of which they appreciate the potato and the tomato kind of equally.
I like both.
Mm-hmm.
Both are really good.
Yeah. And then like olive oil versus butter, Europe, you know? But then we can talk about like Turkey in a second. But Turkey is like they have the best of both worlds. We had Turkish food recently and I was like extolling the virtues of it to you.
Yeah,
just
Cafe
like,
Istanbul. I recommend it.
No, crazy good. But it's like they have like Middle Eastern like flatbread, pita, laffa bread type of stuff. And then they also have like conventional like European style bread. And they have butter and olive oil, and they use olive oil on cold dishes, butter on hot dishes. Like they've got it all.
Yeah. I honestly like that was, other than like donor-esque things like here and there, that was my first time really having Turkish food, and I do want to go back eventually. Yeah. So on Turkey, so Vienna, Austria was not used as the site of the most recent prisoner exchange between the U.S. and Russia. Although there were other countries involved, it was actually a pretty complex negotiation between multiple countries. But on August 1st, prisoners were exchanged in Turkey. And you might have seen this because there was a meme that came out, because amongst the prisoners, there were 2 children. 2 of them had kids, like a husband and wife. They had children, and the children had no idea that they were Russian. And they
secretly Russian.
They were suddenly deported to Russia as part of this prisoner exchange. And then they got off the plane, and then Vladimir Putin is like giving their mom flowers, and their mom is crying, and the kids don't even know who Vladimir Putin is. And it's like probably going to be their most famous moment of their entire lives. And they're just like thrust into it with like no foresight.
As a political like pawn. Yeah. That's crazy.
Yeah, I feel like espionage doesn't really make the news that often. It usually is prisoners swaps. Usually we hear about it like after the fact. Yeah,
Brittany Griner getting swapped for that arms dealer. Yeah, he had some cool name. What did they call him? Like the warlord of I forget. But
I mean, I'm glad we got her out, but she was in the news like so much more than honestly I feel like she should be. But like that's just like mainstream news. Like regularly I'll look at the headlines and I'll be like, this is a slow week. Like everything that's on
they're really scraping by here.
Yeah. Like they're honestly, like with how crazy things were the last 2 months, I kind of look at CNN.com every day right now, just because for a few
why do that? Why do you do that?
No, for a few weeks with like the assassination, you know, with Harris, like with Vance, like there was just like a lot happening, and it actually like for a minute it was like, oh yeah, the news actually reports on things. I should I do check the news, not CNN, but yeah. So yeah, I feel like usually what gets in the news with like modern cases of espionage is against prisoner swaps. But an example I can think of, which I mostly know about this because I'm like a political junkie, as I've talked about, like I know a lot more in politics than I usually bring up on the show. But there's a congressman from California, Eric Swalwell, who is a candidate in the 2020 Democratic presidential primary. And he reads as being like very, very moderate, but he's surprisingly not in the Blue Dog Democrat or the Problem Solvers caucuses, which are how you can tell if your congressman sucks. Honestly, go look at your congressman's Wikipedia and check out their caucuses. If they're in either of those two, try to get them out.
Yeah. I hate the name, the Problem Solvers. It's just so like, it's like, you know, everyone else is a do-nothing politician. We're the real problem solvers. I always liked in Parks and Rec, there's like a cult of crazy people called the Rationalists. And I think that's such a smart move, because anyone who argues against you, you know, is like, oh, come on, man, I'm a rationalist. Who the hell are you?
Yeah. I always feel like problem solvers in my head, I feel like it's supposed to end with a Z because it's so dumb.
Problem solvers. That's good.
Yeah. But yeah, so before Eric Swalwell was elected to Congress, he was compromised by a Chinese spy. So her name was Feng Feng, or Christine Feng, and she helped him fundraise and also placed a Chinese intern at his Washington, D.C. office. So Swalwell, as far as like the CIA is concerned, legitimately, it doesn't seem like he passed on any information directly to her. But again, like she was in close proximity to him, and she might have been going through his documents. Like, I don't know the full story. It's not really ever going to be publicly available, probably. But this Chinese spy, Christine Feng, she did sleep with 2 unnamed Midwestern mayors.
Man.
And Eric Swalwell's office has declined comment when he's been directly asked if he also had sex with her. So he may have slept with this Chinese spy, which is very Bond.
Yeah, this is very Bond, honeypot kind of situation. But yeah, you're just like, You don't really expect that to happen. But also, like, Midwestern mayors? Is that a top priority for the Chinese government?
Watch it was Pete Buttigieg.
Yeah, she turned Pete Buttigieg. Yeah. I was going to joke that it was Lori Lightfoot. That's mean. We hope to have her on the show someday, maybe. So
yeah.
But no.
Yeah. Can you think of any other examples of like recent spy things in the 21st century?
I mean, I was really interested in the assassination of King Jong-nam. So that's the brother of King Jong-un. God, I always get so messed up on
Kim
that.
Jong-un. You said King.
Kim Jong-un.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was killed on British soil, and they like threw his skin past a poison that killed him. And that's just so crazy to me that we're like, that's the most like gadgety type of sci-fi stuff. But King Jong-un is very into like spy movies and stuff. People have said that he's like loves Hollywood media, and his father did too.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I actually found myself like questioning if someone was poisoned yesterday because I saw something on Reddit about David Graeber and, you know, his untimely death. He died in 2020 and was like 59 or something. But shortly before he died, he did a debate with Peter Thiel, and someone had joked like, oh yeah, he was offed by Peter Thiel because he kind of died randomly out of the blue in like Venice, Italy. I don't know the cause, but yeah, I found myself for a second being like, you know, I feel like Peter Thiel can and
wouldn't be above it. Yeah.
He wouldn't be above it.
No.
But actually, I watched the debate because I was curious. I was like, oh, how inflammatory was it? They're actually agreeing quite a lot because Peter Thiel, he's a libertarian, which I don't like libertarians. Mm-hmm. But then David Graeber, he's a leftist, but as I saw in The Dawn of Everything, he kind of understands anarchism, and he made a case for anarchism that I've never seen. I've never viewed it as like a legitimate political ideology because from my perspective, it's never been tried. But in The Dawn of Everything, he was looking at like ancient cultures and like, you know, Paleolithic cultures and pointing to all these examples of like people who would like negotiate what their everyday life would be like day to day. And they would like be able to change their form of government and their subsistence model. And like, yeah, it did change my mind. I don't, again, really think like modern anarchism is like maybe legitimate, but yeah, they were agreeing in this debate way more than I thought they would.
Interesting. I should watch that.
Yeah. And then to sort of round off, so, okay, what do you think is like the final frontier of spy-fi or like the modern frontier? Because as we've gone through, I think that like spy-fi emerged as a genre as detective stories gained more complex story elements that dealt with international relations. So, you know, they started to get espionage cases, Cold War elements, nuclear technology, computers. Each of these added new dimensions to the genre. And I would argue that like the modern frontier is whistleblowers.
Yeah, I think it was interesting to see. It just sounds like it's not as well suited to being entertaining as car chases and Bond girls and all that. But they did make that movie with Joseph Gordon-Levitt about, you know, the whistleblowing there. And then, I don't know, there is like, yeah, information warfare is, of course, the last frontier. Like field operations are never going to be as useful as just like tapping information off the web. But I don't know. I don't think it's ever going to be as interesting as field operations to me. Like, I want to see people get shot.
Yeah, I think if whistleblowers were to be added into spy-fi, they're going to have a more complex role. They're going to kind of subvert the genre because generally spies are actors on behalf of the state. They're agents. And whistleblowers, they're anti-heroes in a way where they're then the targets of government agencies for spilling secrets. And so I think they can be incorporated in like very tasteful ways though, because they can bring up a commentary on the state. You know, for all of its cool technology and sexy secret agents, it's deeply flawed and it lacks a moral compass. Yeah.
No, I think it's how America treats its whistleblowers like goes back to, you know, in the origins of spy-fi is just like, how do you make an admirable, heroic, brave spy? And we tolerate it like when we have James Bond, the super spy and all that. But I remember a lot of the discourse around like the discourse around Edward Snowden when it first broke, like, of course, we were talking about the actual like security matters of it and Americans being spied on and all that. But there was a lot of just like very gendered stuff going around of like, he's a coward. he's a ninny. Like, I remember my sister ganging up on that too. He's like, yeah, he's just like a pencil necked like coward. You know, he's afraid. That's why he's running. If he thinks he's done something right, then stay. Don't run. Like I think we like fall back on that as like, are spies ever actually brave?
Yeah. I mean, I'm always surprised when people don't like Snowden and Assange, because I come from that side of the left. That's sort of my origin. I'm not really there as much now, but I'm still like, yes, free Assange, free Snowden. But I met someone, we met someone in Milwaukee recently who I thought he had Edward Snowden vibes, and I said that as a compliment. And then he was like, oh, I don't like him. I'm actually like a moderate liberal. And I was like,
he said that? He said a moderate liberal?
Well, he called himself an S-word lib. Yeah, but I think Snowden's cool. Like, have you ever seen his like modeling photos?
Yeah, he looks very so demure, as people say nowadays.
I'll link that in the show notes. You have to see it.
Yeah,
I've shown people those pictures, and then they made him. They're like screensaver because they're like, yeah, I love that.
He's just got very fine features. He kind of looks like the man on the Irish Catholic side of my family. Actually, I feel like they all have very like high cheekbones and stuff. But
this was a fun episode. I have to go to Brazil now. I'm like not even prepared to go to like a foreign country like right now.
No, but you got it, man.
I know.
You buy the ticket, you take the ride.
I've barely been thinking about this. Like, it's gonna be good though. I'll be there in Rio for like 2 weeks. I'll also make a trek to Sao Paulo.
I'm trying to think of what I'm gonna research on for my part of the Brazil episode. It'll be more interview format of me asking you Brazil stuff.
It's gonna be low stakes. We don't have to really research it that much.
And then I'll be in Copenhagen in October. We can maybe do a Scandinavia Copenhagen episode or European, just like vague European capitals episode.
Yeah. If we do have any listeners in Brazil, or I'll say it for you, but maybe you would want to meet up with someone there.
I feel like being in Copenhagen is a good sorting mechanism. Like if I was going to, I'm trying to think of an American city I wouldn't want to meet up with a random person off the internet in, but
yeah. We do have listeners from both countries. So if you're in either place, feel free to like reach out to us.
And I don't know, I'm always fascinated by our one Mongolian listener, but keep going strong. I hope you're still listening.
Yeah. Okay. Bye everyone. Thanks. See you in 2 weeks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.